Sometimes, the people we save end up saving us in ways we never imagined. This is a story about two broken souls whose lives were bound by one act of courage, and forever changed by love that healed what time could not. There are stories that touch the soul long after they're told. This is one of them. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to encourage us to bring more stories that heal our souls, one heartbeat at a time. Let's begin. The river had always been cruel in the spring. It looked calm from a distance, but anyone who had grown up in Willowmere knew its secrets. The way its undercurrent could turn gentle ripples into a silent drag beneath the surface. On the morning it happened, Lucien Ward stood on the old wooden bridge, staring at the water that once mirrored his childhood laughter. His jacket was soaked from the rain, his eyes red from a sleepless night, and though the world around him was bursting with the scent of wet earth and lilacs, Lucien felt nothing. The wind carried faint echoes of a girl's voice, a scream that had once split the silence years ago. It was that scream that had changed everything. Lucien had been 20 then, reckless, quiet, and lost in the kind of grief that makes a person disappear even when they're still breathing. The town had whispered about him since his father's accident, about how he never smiled, how he'd started walking the riverbanks late at night as if waiting for the water to take him too. But fate had a strange way of weaving pain and purpose together. That afternoon, the river roared with rain, swollen and angry from the storm. Lucien had been heading home when he saw her, a small figure in a yellow raincoat, clutching the railing and crying for help. A little girl, no more than 7, had fallen into the current. Lucien didn't think. He didn't even take off his shoes. He just jumped. The water was ice cold, biting his skin, pulling at his clothes like claws. He fought it, kicked against it, and reached for the little girl whose eyes were wide with terror. His fingers brushed hers once, then again, and finally he grabbed her wrist. He remembered the sound she made, not a scream, not even a cry, but a broken gasp as if the air itself had returned her to life. By the time he dragged her to shore, his chest was burning and his knees were bleeding from the rocks. She coughed, sputtered, and then began to cry, loud and desperate, the kind of cry that means a soul has come back from the edge. Lucien sat beside her in the mud, trembling, watching her breathe. She turned to him and whispered, "You saved me." Her name was Aurelia Lane, a name he would never forget. From that day the town began to see Lucien differently. The quiet, broken boy had become something of a hero. But Lucien didn't feel like one. The truth was simpler and darker, that he hadn't saved her because he wanted to live, but because he no longer cared if he died. And yet, in saving her, something in him shifted. That night, for the first time in years, Lucien dreamed of light instead of water. Time slipped quietly through Willowmere like mist over the river. 7 years had passed since the day Lucien pulled Aurelia Lane from the current. The bridge had been rebuilt, the riverbank cleaned, but the people carried that story like a piece of shared folklore, the kind that gets told in whispers at the diner long after the coffee's gone cold. Lucien never left town. He worked at the small mechanic's shop near the train tracks, fixing engines and living in the rhythm of routine. His hands were always stained with oil, his eyes always a little far away. The townsfolk said he'd found peace, but peace wasn't quite the word. He'd simply learned to live beside his ghosts. Each spring, when the river rose again, he'd walk to the bridge at dusk and stand there, as if paying tribute to a memory that refused to fade. He never knew what became of the little girl he saved. Her family had moved away soon after. Rumor said they couldn't bear the place where tragedy had almost swallowed their child. But sometimes, in the quiet of the workshop, Lucien thought he heard laughter, soft, distant, like an echo from another lifetime. And every time he'd pause, eyes closing, half smiling through the ache. 100 miles away, in a small city framed by fields of wild lavender, Aurelia Lane grew into a young woman marked by both light and shadow. She didn't remember much about the river, only flashes, the storm, the rush of water, and the face of a stranger pulling her into daylight. But that face lingered in dreams, blurred yet familiar, as if her soul remembered what her mind could not. Her parents never spoke of that day. Her father drowned in silence, her mother drowned in worry. Every birthday, her mother would watch her too closely, as if waiting for the water to return and take her back. At 17, Aurelia found herself sketching rivers, endless, winding, alive. The water frightened her, yet she couldn't stay away from it. Art became the way she translated fear into something she could hold without breaking. When she was 20, she returned to Willowmere for the first time since the rescue. Her mother had passed, and her father had asked her to sell the old family cottage. Driving into town felt like driving into memory, the air heavy with rain, the scent of pine, the rusted sign that still read "Welcome to Willowmere, a good place to grow." The bridge stood waiting. The same river, quieter now. She parked her car, stepped out, and walked to the railing. The water glimmered gold beneath the sunset, calm and indifferent. That's when she saw him. Lucien was leaning against his old truck, sleeves rolled, wiping grease from his hands. The years had carved gentleness into his face, though his eyes still held that far-off storm. Aurelia didn't recognize him at first. But when he looked up, something inside her stilled. It was that same stillness she remembered before she drowned, the quiet between panic and breath. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded politely like strangers do in small towns. She wanted to speak, to ask if he remembered, if he knew who she was, but her voice caught. Instead, she just smiled, turned toward the bridge again, and whispered a thank you the wind carried away. Over the next few days, Aurelia found reasons to linger in Willowmere. She said she was sorting through her parents' belongings, but really she was chasing pieces of something unnamed. At night, she walked the same roads, sketchbook in hand, filling page after page with drawings of water, each one darker than the last, until the lines began to blur into faces. Lucien noticed her around town, at the diner, at the mechanics, once in the rain outside the library. He didn't say anything at first. He just watched, quietly curious about the way her presence unsettled his peace. One afternoon, as thunder rumbled far away, Aurelia's car broke down on the edge of town. Lucien found her by chance. He offered help, and as he leaned under the hood, she finally said, "You fixed more than engines once?" He froze. The rain began to fall softly. She continued, "By the river. You pulled me out." Lucien looked at her, really looked. Recognition flickered across his face like lightning behind clouds. "You were the girl in the yellow coat," he whispered. Aurelia nodded, eyes glistening. "I never got to thank you." "You just did," he said quietly. They stood there a long while, the rain falling harder, washing away years of silence. For the first time in forever, Lucien laughed, a low, unguarded laugh that sounded like freedom. And for the first time since the river, Aurelia didn't feel afraid of water. That evening they shared coffee at the small diner by the tracks. She told him about art school, about her mother, about nightmares that never really ended. He listened without interrupting, every word a thread pulling him closer to her world. He told her about his father, about the accident, about how saving her had been the only moment that ever felt like purpose. There was no romance yet, only recognition, two souls tracing the outlines of an old wound, realizing they carried the same scar. When Aurelia left that night, she said, "Maybe some debts are never repaid. Maybe they become reasons to keep living." Lucien watched her car disappear down the road, headlights swallowed by the mist, and for the first time in years, the silence around him felt alive. The summer that followed was the gentlest Willowmere had seen in years. The fields bloomed early, the rain came soft and forgiving, and the river flowed quiet as breath. But for Lucien Ward, the season carried something heavier than weather, the feeling that time had looped back to test what he'd once saved. Aurelia had stayed. She rented a small cabin near the orchard road, surrounded by tall grass and fireflies. She said it helped her paint, the quiet, the distance, the ghosts. Sometimes, Lucien would drive by on his way home from work and see her outside, barefoot in the dew, her easel catching the dying light of evening. She painted rivers, but they no longer looked angry. They looked like memory softened by forgiveness. The townspeople noticed, too, the way she and Lucien spoke softly when they crossed paths, like they were guarding something precious between them. But they didn't pry. In small towns, silence is a kind of respect. One evening, Aurelia invited him to her cabin. The sky had just begun to bruise into purple, and the air smelled of pine and distant rain. Inside, her paintings leaned against every wall, hundreds of rivers, hundreds of skies. "They used to be darker," she said almost shyly. "Now they keep turning blue again." Lucien smiled, tracing the edge of a canvas. "That's how healing works. It sneaks up on you." They shared tea by the window, the kettle whistling like a memory. It should have felt simple. Quiet conversation, shared laughter, the slow build of warmth between two people who had learned to live with ache. But that night, Aurelia woke from a dream that pulled her back into the river, cold, choking, the sound of water over her heartbeat. When she gasped awake, her hands trembled. Lucien heard her through the thin cabin walls and knocked softly. "It's just a dream," she whispered, voice breaking. He sat beside her on the edge of the bed, keeping his distance but close enough for his presence to steady her breathing. "Dreams don't drown you," he said quietly. "They just remind you how it felt to need air." She turned to him then, eyes shining in the moonlight. "You don't have dreams?" Lucien looked down. "Only one. And it ends before I can reach the shore." Their eyes met. The same current that had pulled them under years ago now drawing them into something unspoken. Aurelia reached for his hand, not out of romance but out of recognition. Two survivors touching proof that they had lived through the same story. Maybe, she whispered, we both survived to finish each other's dream. Days turned into weeks. Aurelia's art flourished, her laughter returning like birds after winter. Lucien found himself fixing more than cars. He helped repair fences, roofs, and even hearts around town. The locals said his presence made things work again. But peace as always was fragile. Late in August, the rains returned, fierce, sudden, merciless. The river rose higher than it had in years, swallowing fields and bending trees. The townspeople gathered sandbags, praying the bridge would hold. Lucien was among them, boots deep in mud, directing the others with quiet urgency. The storm's roar reminded him too much of that day long ago. Aurelia came running, raincoat clutched around her shoulders, the same yellow as before. The color nearly broke him. You shouldn't be here, he shouted over the storm. I can't lose you to that water again. But she only shook her head, hair plastered to her face. You didn't save me to have me watch you drown now. Before he could stop her, she climbed onto the sandbank, helping secure the ropes that kept the bridge intact. The current fought them, hissing and pulling at the foundation. Then it happened, the far end gave way. The bridge split with a groan that silenced everything. Lucien lunged forward, reaching for her, but the board beneath his feet snapped. Aurelia screamed his name. The world blurred into thunder, wind, and cold. When the water hit, it felt like falling into a memory. He surfaced, gasping, arms thrashing against the pull. He couldn't see her, only flashes of yellow vanishing beneath the waves. Aurelia. He dived, lungs burning, searching through the chaos until his fingers found fabric, the sleeve of her coat. He pulled with everything he had left. The current dragged them toward the rocks. She fought weakly, coughing water, eyes wide in terror. And then she pushed him away. No. You have to let go. But he wouldn't. Not again. With the last of his strength, Lucien kicked toward the shallows. The river roared behind them, swallowing debris and light. When he finally pulled her onto the muddy bank, she was limp, not breathing. No, 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 he whispered, pounding at her chest, breathless, desperate. Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene. Two souls, one half gone, the other refusing to accept it. And then a gasp. She coughed up water, choking, trembling. Lucien fell beside her, crying harder than he ever had, forehead pressed to her shoulder as rain poured down. I told you, she rasped weakly, you don't have to save me anymore. I'll keep doing it anyway, he said through tears. Until I learn how to stop. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The river lay quiet again, as if nothing had happened. But something had, something that neither of them could undo. That morning, as the mist lifted, Aurelia stood by the bank, barefoot, eyes closed. The river didn't want us, she said softly. Maybe it never did. Lucien joined her, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. Maybe it wanted us to remember that we can't live half alive. She looked up at him and smiled. Not the kind of smile that begins something, but the kind that heals what was broken. That day became known in Willowmere as the second rescue. But between them it was never spoken again. It didn't need to be. Because from that moment on, every quiet morning they shared, every glance, every gentle word, was another small act of saving. They had both gone back into the river. And both had chosen to come out together this time. Autumn came gently that year. The fields turned gold, and the air tasted of apples and smoke. The town of Willowmere returned to its rhythm, but for Lucien and Aurelia, the world seemed slower, softer, as if the storm had rinsed the noise out of their lives and left only what truly mattered. Aurelia recovered slowly. The river had taken her breath again, but not her spirit. The doctor said she was lucky. She said she was done being lucky. She wanted to live on purpose now. Lucien visited her cabin every evening after work. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. Silence had become its own language between them, one built on everything words couldn't hold. He'd bring her sketches she'd forgotten in town. She'd bring him small painted stones with rivers carved in blue. One night, she handed him one that shimmered faintly under the lantern light. For when I'm not here, she said. It's the river, only this time you're not in it. You're standing on the shore. Lucien smiled, though something in her voice made his chest tighten. You talk like you're leaving. Not leaving, she said softly. Just returning. My art shows in the city next month. I need to try, Lucien. You showed me what it means to come back from drowning. Now I have to see what it means to move forward. He nodded because he understood. But when she drove away weeks later, The sound of her engine fading down the road felt like the sound of the river closing over again. Winter folded in. Lucien worked, waited, and watched the snow bury the bridge rails. Every now and then he'd get a postcard, watercolor sketches of city skylines, her handwriting messy but alive. Still painting rivers. They all end up looking like home. I dream less of drowning now. You were right, healing sneaks up on you. Months passed and the postcard stopped coming. He didn't panic at first. Life was busy, the city loud. But one February morning a small package arrived. No return address. Inside was a single painting. It showed two figures standing by a river under dawn light. One shadowed, one bright, their reflections merging in the water. At the bottom corner, a note written in soft pencil. You saved me once. But all these years, Lucien, you were the one who needed saving. So I painted you a shore, a place to finally rest. Aurelia. He held the canvas for a long time, fingers trembling. Something inside him broke, not painfully but cleanly, like ice cracking under spring thaw. He didn't know why the letter felt like goodbye. A week later word came from the city. Aurelia's gallery opening had drawn hundreds. Her art was hailed as a portrait of survival in motion. But after the event she'd collapsed quietly in her studio. The doctors said her heart had stopped, a complication they never saw coming. Lucien drove through the night to the city, the headlights carving tunnels through rain. When he reached her studio, it was empty except for her paintings, hundreds of rivers, all glowing in soft, impossible light. He stood there for hours, surrounded by the soundless echo of her presence. And then he smiled through tears, whispering the words she once told him. Maybe some debts are never repaid. Maybe they become reasons to keep living. Spring returned to Willowmere. The bridge had been repaired again, the river calmer now. Lucien still visited every morning, carrying with him the painted stone she'd given him. He'd place it on the railing, close his eyes, and let the wind move through his hair like memory. One morning a group of children passed by on their way to school. One of them stopped and asked, "Mister, why do you always come here?" Lucien smiled, looking at the boy. "Because someone once saved me from forgetting how to live." The boy tilted his head. "Was it her?" he asked, pointing to a small plaque near the bridge, one that read, "In memory of Aurelia Lane, who taught us that healing is another kind of rescue." Lucien's eyes softened. "Yes," he said quietly. "It was her." He turned to the river, its surface golden with morning. For the first time he didn't see tragedy. He saw reflection, his own whole and still. "You saved me once," he whispered to the wind. "But you saved me forever when you left me something to believe in." The river moved on endlessly, not cruel now, not kind, just alive. Lucien stayed until the sun climbed high, then walked home. In his pocket, the stone Aurelia painted felt warm. The color of life. Sometimes, saving someone isn't about that one moment of courage. It's about what that moment awakens. The small, invisible ways we start to heal each other long after the rescue ends. Lucien saved Aurelia once. But in teaching him how to live again, she saved him forever. And maybe that's what love truly is. Not a promise to stay, but a gift that keeps us breathing when the world goes quiet. What did this story make you feel? Tell us in the comments, your thoughts, your theories, your memories. And don't forget to subscribe to Vault of Tales, where stories remind us that even broken souls can find their way back to the light.